I never thought I'd be standing in my own backyard at midnight, holding a flashlight in one hand and a wrench in the other, staring at a powerless house where my pregnant wife slept inside. The neighborhood was silent except for the faint hum of our backup generator struggling to kick in. But this wasn't some random power outage. No, this was sabotage. And the culprit wasn't a stranger, wasn't a thief. It was our very own HOA president, Karen. She had crossed a line so bold, so reckless, that not even she could laugh her way out of it. What started as petty harassment about grass length and baby supplies ended in flashing red and blue lights and a SWAT team surrounding her precious McMansion. And I'll never forget the look on her face when her empire crumbled. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start with handcuffs. It starts with my wife's pregnancy, a quiet move, and a neighbor who decided she was queen of the block. Before we get into it, drop a quick comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is there. When my wife and I first moved into the neighborhood, I'll admit I thought we had scored the jackpot. Picture-perfect houses lined with freshly cut lawns, driveways that gleamed as if waxed weekly, and a suburban quietness that made you feel like you were stepping into one of those glossy brochures realtors hand out. It looked safe, calm, and exactly the kind of environment I wanted my wife, 7 months pregnant at the time, to rest in. I'm not a complicated guy. I've worked hard my whole life, saved diligently, and when my wife and I learned we were expecting, I knew it was time to settle down in a place that promised stability. And at first glance, this neighborhood seemed to scream perfect for families. There was even a small playground, a community pool, and a lake you could walk around in the evenings. The realtor had sung its praises, and the words "well-managed HOA" had rolled off his tongue like a golden seal of approval. What he didn't say, and what I would later learn the hard way, was that well-managed in realtor language sometimes translates to tyrant in a polo shirt with too much time on her hands. Our first day moving in was hectic but cheerful. My wife sat on the porch swing, sipping lemonade and rubbing her belly while movers carried in box after box. She looked tired but happy, the way someone looks when they finally see their hard work manifest in a dream home. I remember thinking, this is it. This is where our new life begins. That's when she appeared. Karen. She strutted across the cul-de-sac with the kind of confidence only people who believe they own the ground under your feet seem to possess. Mid-50s blonde bob that looked freshly shellacked with hairspray, oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy day, and a clipboard tucked under one arm like it was a weapon. She wore a bright pink jogging suit that clashed aggressively with the neutral tones of the neighborhood. And of course the smile. That tight-lipped, fake-friendly, I'm about to ruin your day, but you'll thank me later kind of smile. Welcome, she chirped, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I'm Karen, the president of our HOA. It's so wonderful to have new neighbors. Now, I'm not a paranoid man. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. So when she launched into small talk, asking where we were from, how far along my wife was, whether we had family nearby, I smiled and played along. My wife, bless her heart, answered politely too, though I could see her shifting uncomfortably. There was something about Karen's questions that didn't feel like neighborly curiosity. It felt like an interview. Then came the binder. Oh, and before I forget, Karen pulled from her clipboard a 3-inch thick binder that she carried like it was the Bible itself. These are the HOA rules. You'll want to go through them thoroughly. We take pride in keeping our community consistent. I accepted the binder with both hands because the thing weighed as much as a brick. I laughed nervously, thinking she was exaggerating. She wasn't. Flipping through later, I found rules for everything from how tall your grass could be to what color curtains were acceptable to how many cars could be parked in the driveway overnight. There were even notes on seasonal decoration policies. Apparently Halloween skeletons taller than 4 feet were a no-go. At the time I thought, all right, maybe this is just how HOAs work. We'll adapt. I didn't realize Karen wasn't just a president. She was a dictator with too much caffeine and too little compassion. The first real red flag came that very evening. I was unloading the last of the moving boxes, baby furniture, mostly when I noticed Karen standing on the sidewalk watching. Not smiling, not waving, just watching. She had her phone out like she was taking notes or maybe snapping photos. When she caught me noticing, she quickly gave a little wave and walked off. Did you see that? I asked my wife once I got back inside. She's probably just thorough, my wife replied, though her voice lacked conviction. She was trying to be positive. She wanted this move to work as much as I did. But the thoroughness didn't stop. The very next morning, as we were unpacking, Karen dropped by again, this time with a polite warning. I just wanted to let you know, she said, peeking into our garage without invitation, that boxes left in driveways longer than 48 hours are considered clutter. We wouldn't want anyone to get fined so soon after moving in, would we? I stared at her, incredulous. We'd been in the house less than 24 hours. Movers were still scheduled to come back with another load. But Karen, unfazed, tapped her clipboard and gave me that same tight smile. That was the moment I realized we weren't just moving into a new house. We were moving into her kingdom. I brushed it off at first. I didn't want stress for my wife. Pregnancy was already demanding, and she needed calm, not conflict. But as the days turned into weeks, Karen's visits grew more frequent and her comments sharper. She criticized the color of the mulch we laid down, hinted that my car looked like it leaked oil on the driveway, and once even suggested that my wife should take more walks instead of napping all day. It wasn't just invasive, it was personal. Still, I kept telling myself to be patient, to let it go. After all, we were the new family on the block, and rocking the boat wouldn't help. But in the back of my mind, something whispered that this wasn't going to be a case of tough neighbor but tolerable. This was just the beginning of a storm. At first, I told myself that Karen's nosy behavior was just her way of welcoming us. Maybe she was one of those neighbors who lived and breathed rules but meant well deep down. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But within weeks, any illusion of harmlessness shattered like a cheap lawn ornament under a car tire. It started small, with complaints that seemed almost laughable. One morning, I opened our mailbox and found a bright yellow slip, our first HOA notice. The violation: excessive deliveries causing visual clutter. I stared at it in disbelief. The so-called clutter was nothing more than Amazon packages stacked neatly by the door: baby bottles, blankets, diapers, a car seat. All the things we'd been ordering for the baby. When I asked Karen about it, she didn't even flinch. "We have standards," she said, her sunglasses reflecting my annoyed expression. "This isn't a warehouse, dear. Packages left visible for too long bring down the neighborhood's image." I bit my tongue, reminded myself. My wife was inside napping and carried the boxes in silently. But inside, the anger was beginning to simmer. The next week it got worse. Another notice this time, about unsightly trash. Now, I'll admit we had broken down several large cardboard boxes from the crib and stroller deliveries, but I had bundled them neatly by the curb for pickup exactly as the city guidelines required. Apparently that wasn't good enough for Karen. She stood across the street that morning, watching like a hawk, then sauntered over. "Those boxes should be inside until collection day," she scolded. "You can't just parade your purchases around for the whole neighborhood." I laughed bitterly. "They're baby supplies, Karen. I don't think Pampers is lowering anyone's property value." She pursed her lips, scribbled something on her clipboard, and muttered, "Rules are rules." But the cruelest jab came when she directed her criticism at my wife. One sweltering afternoon, my wife was resting on the porch, her swollen ankles propped on a footstool. Karen marched up, eyes scanning like a security guard at an airport. "Getting a bit too much rest, aren't we?" she said in that syrupy tone, as if she were offering helpful advice. "At your stage, you should be walking more. Exercise helps the baby, you know." My wife's face turned pale, then red. She managed a polite smile, but when Karen left, I saw tears welling in her eyes. She whispered, "Why does she think she can talk to me like that?" That was the breaking point for me. Criticize my lawn, my boxes, my car, fine. But the moment she started undermining my wife's dignity while she was already enduring the physical toll of pregnancy, it was war. I tried confronting Karen directly, hoping reason might work. One evening I walked over as she watered her roses. "Look," I began, forcing calm into my voice. "We appreciate the HOA's efforts, but this constant nitpicking, it's getting out of hand. My wife doesn't need this stress right now." Karen turned off the hose and smiled that maddening tight smile. "If she can't handle the rules, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for you." I clenched my fists. "We bought this house, Karen. We're not going anywhere." Her smirk deepened. "Oh, you'll find the HOA always wins." That phrase stuck with me. The arrogance of it, the smug certainty. She truly believed she was untouchable. From that point, it was like she doubled her efforts to prove it. Notices began arriving almost weekly. A fine for improper window coverings because the nursery curtains were patterned with cartoon clouds instead of plain white. A warning about vehicle leakage, even though my car had just passed a full inspection. A threat about overgrown landscaping when all I had done was let the backyard grass grow half an inch past the allowed length. Each paper, each knock on the door felt less like neighborly concern and more like psychological warfare. And the worst part, she enjoyed it. I could see it in the way she lingered after delivering notices, waiting for me to react. The way she casually waved to other neighbors while lecturing me as if to show she was in charge. The neighbors weren't much help either. Some avoided eye contact, clearly scared of crossing Karen. A few whispered sympathy when Karen wasn't around, but nobody dared to stand up to her publicly. It was as if she had the entire block under a spell, or maybe under threat of fines so ridiculous nobody wanted to risk it. I started to wonder what drove her. Did she genuinely believe she was protecting property values? Or was it something darker, control for the sake of control? The tension in our home grew heavier with every incident. My wife tried to hide her stress, but I could see the toll it was taking. Sleep came harder, her smiles more forced. I began staying up later just to make sure Karen wasn't prowling around our yard. One night, as I sat by the window, I saw her silhouette across the street, phone in hand, pointing toward our house. Was she photographing us, reporting us? I didn't know, but my gut told me things were about to escalate beyond passive-aggressive notices and snide comments. And I was right, because Karen wasn't finished. She was just warming up. The next move she made would cross a boundary so sacred, so unforgivable, it would ignite a chain of events even she couldn't control. It was one of those nights where silence wraps around the house like a blanket. My wife had finally managed to drift into a deep sleep after hours of tossing and turning. Pregnancy insomnia was cruel, and every minute of rest mattered. I remember sitting in the living room scrolling aimlessly on my phone, just savoring the peace. For once, Karen hadn't bothered us that day. No notices, no glares, no clipboard lurking at the edge of the lawn. I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd get a break. Then click. The house went black. Not dim, not flickering, black. Every bulb, every hum of the fridge, the AC unit, the Wi-Fi router, all dead in an instant. At first I thought it was a neighborhood outage. Storm rolling in, maybe a transformer blew. But when I peered through the blinds, every other house on the block glowed warmly. Porch lights, TVs flickering, kids' nightlights twinkling. Ours was the only house drowned in darkness. My stomach dropped. I rushed upstairs. My wife stirred groggy. What happened? She whispered, her hand instinctively going to her belly. The faint panic in her voice hit me harder than any blackout could. I reassured her quickly, stay calm. I'll check the breaker. It's probably nothing. I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. The night air was sticky, and my nerves buzzed louder than the cicadas. When I rounded the corner of the house, I froze. There she was, Karen, standing by our electrical panel with a smug grin, flashlight in one hand, clipboard in the other. She looked like a villain out of a bad soap opera, except this was real life, and my pregnant wife was upstairs sweating in the dark. What the hell are you doing? I snapped, rushing toward her. She didn't flinch. HOA regulations, she said calmly, as if that explained everything. After 10 p.m., unnecessary power usage is prohibited. It disturbs the neighborhood's peace. I blinked at her, dumbfounded. Unnecessary power? Are you insane? My wife is pregnant. She needs the AC, the fans, the everything. Karen tilted her head like a teacher explaining math to a slow student. Your constant use of lights and devices after hours has been noted. The board agrees it's disruptive. Consider this. An enforced correction. I could barely process the audacity. She wasn't just harassing us now, she had physically tampered with our property. She had crossed from petty dictator to criminal. Turn it back on, I growled. Her smirk widened. Or what, you'll file another complaint with the city. They don't listen. I am the authority here. Something in me snapped. All the weeks of her pettiness, the humiliation she dealt, my wife, the endless notices, they boiled over into raw fury. I stepped closer, my flashlight beam cutting across her face. For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in her eyes, but she covered it quickly with that smug smile. Karen, I said, voice low and sharp, you just committed trespassing and vandalism. This isn't an HOA rule, it's a crime. You crossed a line you can't uncross. She laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, please. The HOA protects me. You're just another whiner who can't handle order. You'll thank me someday. Behind me, I heard the window slide open. My wife's voice trembling. What's happening out there? Karen shouted back before I could answer. Don't worry, dear, just keeping your husband accountable to the rules. That was it. That was the moment the last shred of patience I had dissolved. My wife gasped, panicked in the dark, and Karen mocked us like we were children under her thumb. I turned storm to the panel and flipped the breaker back myself. Light surged in the house. My wife sighed with relief. I faced Karen again, my voice steady but ice cold. This ends now. You've made a mistake that's going to cost you more than you realize. For the first time, her smirk faltered. She huffed, scribbled something on her clipboard, and snapped. You'll regret this. Then she marched off into the night flashlight beam, bobbing like an angry firefly. I stood there, my hands trembling, my heart pounding. Not from fear, but from clarity. Karen had declared war, and she had no idea who she was fighting. Inside, my wife clutched my arm. We can't keep living like this, she whispered, eyes wide. I kissed her forehead. We won't. She thinks she's untouchable. Let's show her she's not. That night, I barely slept. I replayed the scene over and over. The arrogance, the trespassing, the outright cruelty. Karen had made herself queen of the block, but queens fall hardest when their crowns are fake, and I was done playing her game. From that night forward, the rules changed. Because when someone endangers my family, especially my pregnant wife, there's no HOA fine big enough to save them from what's coming. Karen thought she'd scared me into submission. In reality, she had just armed me with the resolve to take her down piece by piece. The fuse box incident wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The morning after Karen cut our power, I woke up with a headache that no amount of coffee could cure. My wife barely slept, her nerves rattled by the blackout. She looked pale, exhausted, and more anxious than I had ever seen her. Seeing her like that, clutching her stomach as if to shield the baby from the chaos outside, flipped a switch in me. I wasn't just annoyed with Karen anymore, I was done tolerating her. It was time to fight back. But I knew I couldn't storm over and scream at her. That would give her exactly what she wanted, ammunition to paint me as the aggressive neighbor. No, this had to be smart, calculated, documented. So I started with cameras. I drove to the nearest electronics store and bought a full set of motion-activated security cameras. 8 of them high-resolution with night vision. That same afternoon, I installed them around the house, front porch, driveway, backyard, even angled one directly at the electrical panel Karen had tampered with. Every inch of my property became my watchtower. I told my wife, from now on, every step she takes near our yard will be recorded. No more he said, she said. That night, as if on cue, Karen showed up. Not to cut the power this time, she wasn't that reckless twice in a row, but to stand at the edge of the sidewalk, phone out, snapping photos of our trash cans. The cameras caught it all, her zooming in, circling around like a vulture. The next morning, like clockwork, another notice arrived. Trash bins not aligned properly with curb standards. Fine $50. I almost laughed. Not out of humor, but because the absurdity was so perfectly on brand for her. But instead of crumpling it and tossing it aside, I filed it neatly into a folder. Evidence. Every letter, every fine, every smug attempt at control, I collected them all. Still, I knew local police weren't going to care about HOA squabbles. If I wanted to stop Karen, I needed more. Something bigger. That's when I started talking to the neighbors. At first, they were reluctant. Years of Karen's intimidation had left most of them wary of speaking out. But little by little, cracks formed in her facade. Mrs. Green across the street whispered that Karen once fined her for planting roses that weren't on the approved species list. A young couple admitted Karen threatened them with foreclosure over improperly stored bicycles. Another neighbor confessed she'd entered his yard without permission to inspect his fence for compliance. Each story painted the same picture: Karen wasn't a leader. She was a bully with a badge she'd made for herself. I compiled everything. Dates, times, screenshots, video clips. I even dug through old HOA newsletters and financial statements. At first it seemed boring, just endless spreadsheets of dues collected and expenses listed. But then, something strange caught my eye. A line item for community maintenance appeared every month, thousands of dollars allocated. Yet when I asked around, no one had seen repairs, upgrades, or improvements in years. Where was the money going? I dug deeper. Payments labeled as landscaping, but no landscapers ever seen. Security services for a neighborhood with no hired guards. Legal fees with no actual lawsuits filed. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. Karen wasn't just abusing her clipboard power, she was siphoning HOA funds. That was the jackpot. I documented everything meticulously. Screenshots of bank statements courtesy of a neighbor who'd once served on the board and still had access, photos of neglected community areas, videos of Karen trespassing. The case was building itself. But I wasn't ready to hand it over just yet. I wanted her to hang herself a little more, so I baited her. I deliberately left a couple of boxes in the driveway perfectly stacked just to see what she'd do. Within an hour, she was there snapping photos, muttering into her phone. Another notice arrived that afternoon. Violation clutter. Fine $100. I smiled, tucked it into the folder, and added another entry to my growing timeline of harassment. Then came her boldest move yet. One evening, as my wife and I ate dinner, a loud knock rattled the front door. I opened it to find Karen flanked by 2 board members I'd barely seen before. She shoved a paper into my chest. Final warning, she declared. Failure to comply with HOA standards will result in legal action, including, but not limited to, property seizure. I laughed in her face. Property seizure over boxes and curtains, her eyes gleamed. Rules are rules. You'll learn. I didn't argue. I simply pointed to the camera above the door, the little red light blinking. "Smile, Karen. Everything you just said is on record." For the first time, she hesitated. Her lips twitched, and she stormed off without another word. That's when I knew she was starting to feel the heat. I spent the next week finalizing my dossier. Over 200 pages of evidence, harassment notices, financial irregularities, witness statements from neighbors, video stills of her trespassing, and tucked neatly at the end, a summary tying it all together. Karen had abused her role as HOA president to intimidate homeowners, falsify authority, and embezzle funds. The folder wasn't just paperwork, it was a weapon, and I was ready to use it. I wasn't sure yet where it would land: local police, state authorities, maybe even federal agencies if the utilities tampering was serious enough. But one thing was certain: Karen's clipboard empire was about to collapse. She thought she was untouchable. She thought the HOA would protect her forever. But I had learned something important in my line of work. The higher someone builds their throne of lies, the harder they fall when the truth yanks it out from under them. And Karen's fall, it was coming. For weeks I'd been documenting Karen's every move. My folder of evidence had grown so thick it looked like something straight out of a courtroom drama. Still, part of me hoped naively that once she realized I wasn't backing down, she'd back off. But Karen wasn't built that way. She didn't de-escalate, she doubled down. The first sign came in the form of another notice slipped into my mailbox with all the subtlety of a ransom note. Unauthorized display of laundry on porch railings. Fine $75. Laundry. I opened the front door and looked around confused. Then I saw it. My wife's maternity clothes, a few soft cotton dresses she had hung outside to dry in the afternoon sun. She'd done it because the fresh air made them smell clean and crisp, and because sometimes running the dryer made the house uncomfortably hot for her swollen body. But Karen, in all her infinite cruelty, had turned even that into a weapon. I showed my wife the notice. Her face crumpled. "I just wanted them to smell nice for the baby," she whispered. That was it. The sight of her guilt, her tears over something so trivial, lit a fire in me. This wasn't about rules. It wasn't about property values. This was about Karen exerting control for the sheer joy of it. And I was done playing defense. But Karen wasn't done striking. The very next week, another letter arrived. This time it accused us of violating aesthetic guidelines because the nursery curtains were visible from the street. Cartoon clouds, bright and cheerful. Apparently they clashed with the uniform appearance of the neighborhood. The fine $150. I laughed out loud when I read it. Not because it was funny, but because the absurdity had reached levels I couldn't have imagined. Curtains. She was policing curtains. I wasn't the only one fed up. Neighbors had started to murmur more openly. One woman, Mrs. Green, stopped me while I was mowing the lawn. She fined me for wind chimes, she admitted quietly, glancing over her shoulder. Said they were auditory pollution. I took them down, but I hate living like this. Another neighbor confessed Karen once issued a notice because their kid's sidewalk chalk defaced community property. The chalk. That washed away with rain. The more stories I heard, the more I realized Karen had turned the HOA into her personal dictatorship, and everyone was too afraid to challenge her. Well, almost everyone. The final straw came at the next HOA meeting. I didn't want to go, but something told me it was time to face her in public. To make sure the neighbors saw she wasn't invincible, the meeting was held in the community clubhouse. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the smell of stale coffee filled the air. About 24 neighbors sat in folding chairs, their faces tired and wary. At the front sat Karen, perched behind a long table like a queen on her throne. Her trusty clipboard rested beside her, along with a gavel she clearly didn't need but loved to slam. She opened with the usual pomp. "Welcome everyone to this month's HOA meeting. As always, we're here to maintain the integrity of our beautiful community." I waited arms crossed as she rattled off minor agenda items, landscaping contracts, pool maintenance, upcoming community events. Then she cleared her throat and said, "Next, we need to address repeated violations by the new residents on Maple Drive." Every head turned toward me. Karen smiled sweetly. "They've accumulated several fines for clutter, improper decor, and power misuse. If this continues, we may need to escalate to legal measures." That was my cue. I stood folder in hand and walked slowly to the front. The room went quiet. "Funny," I said loudly, because I've been keeping track of Karen's actions too. "And I think it's time the community saw what your president has really been up to." Gasps rippled through the room as I opened the folder and spread papers across the table. Photos of Karen trespassing near my power box. Screenshots of bank statements showing thousands of dollars unaccounted for. Copies of the absurd fines she'd issued not just to me but to half the neighborhood. Karen's face drained of color. "This is outrageous," she barked, slamming her gavel so hard it cracked against the table. "These accusations are baseless lies." I leaned closer, my voice steady. "Then why do I have receipts? Why do I have videos of you tampering with my power? Why do I have neighbors willing to testify you've threatened and extorted them?" The room erupted. Neighbors began murmuring, whispering, some nodding, others glaring at Karen. For the first time, I saw her composure slipping. She clutched her clipboard like it was a lifeline, her knuckles white. "You think you can intimidate me?" she spat, eyes flashing. "The HOA always wins." I met her gaze unflinching. "Not this time. Because I'm not just some homeowner you can bully. And you have no idea how deep this hole you've dug really goes." The silence that followed was thick, charged. Karen tried to move on to dismiss me, but the room had shifted. People weren't afraid anymore. They had seen a crack in her armor. When I walked out of that meeting, I knew the battle wasn't over. Karen wouldn't surrender easily. But I also knew something else. I had momentum now. Neighbors on my side. Evidence stacked higher than her clipboard. She could laugh all she wanted, but the clock was ticking. Karen had pushed me, pushed all of us, past the breaking point. And now, it was only a matter of time before her empire of fines and fake authority came crashing down around her. By the time the HOA meeting ended, I could see the cracks forming in Karen's kingdom. Her neighbors weren't bowing their heads anymore. They weren't nodding in fearful agreement. Instead, they whispered, exchanged glances, and for the first time questioned the woman who had ruled them with an iron clipboard. Karen didn't realize it yet, but the tide had shifted, and I was about to deliver the wave that would sweep her away. You see, while Karen thought she was the only one keeping records, she had no idea who she was messing with. My day job wasn't just some desk gig. I worked in federal security compliance auditing organizations that managed utilities, infrastructure, and safety systems. My entire career was built on spotting irregularities, exposing violations, and turning paperwork into prosecutions. I had the training, the connections, and most importantly, the patience to build a case. And Karen had given me all the material I needed. The night she cut our power, that wasn't just trespassing. Tampering with utilities, even at a residential level, falls under state and sometimes federal jurisdiction depending on the system. When I dug into her so-called enforced correction, I discovered she had been accessing the community's shared grid box, not just my home's breaker. That was a whole new level of reckless. But it didn't stop there. The financial irregularities I'd uncovered. They weren't minor bookkeeping mistakes. The HOA had been collecting thousands in dues every month. Most of it was earmarked for landscaping, security, and maintenance. Yet the landscaping company Karen listed didn't exist. The security vendor she claimed to pay had no record of any contracts. And the legal fees, they were checks made out directly to a shell company, one tied to a P.O. box under Karen's name. Fraud, embezzlement, utility tampering. She wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president, she was a criminal. The more I pieced together, the more I realized Karen's empire wasn't built on authority. It was built on theft and lies. So I called in a favor. I had a contact, an old colleague who worked in a joint task force that handled white-collar crimes and infrastructure tampering. I sent him my dossier, careful to highlight the most damning evidence. Within 48 hours, he called me back. "Are you telling me this woman cut residential power and embezzled community funds?" he asked, disbelief thick in his voice. "Not telling," I replied. "Proving. I have video, financial records, and multiple witnesses." He was silent for a moment, then said, "All right, don't confront her again. Let us handle it." That was the hardest part, waiting. Pretending like life was normal while knowing Karen's days were numbered. She of course kept up her act. Notices still landed in my mailbox, each more ridiculous than the last. One even threatened mandatory repainting of my front door because it clashed with the seasonal color palette. I didn't even bother to get mad anymore. Every notice was just another log on the fire that was about to consume her. The neighbors too began to shift. Slowly they came to me with their own stories, their own files. One elderly couple confessed Karen had been skimming their dues for years, threatening foreclosure if they missed payments. Another neighbor revealed she had demanded cash fines off the record. Piece by piece, Karen's carefully constructed facade crumbled. Then came the night I'll never forget. It started with flashing lights. Red and blue bouncing off the pristine white fences and manicured lawns of our street. At first I thought it was just another patrol car, but then more arrived. Black SUVs, a large armored van, tactical officers spilling out in full gear. My wife and I stood at the window, her hand gripping mine as the convoy rolled to a stop in front of Karen's house. "Is this?" she whispered. I nodded. "It's happening." Neighbors poured out of their homes drawn by the commotion. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as SWAT officers surrounded Karen's McMansion, weapons ready, shields raised. A booming voice echoed through a loudspeaker. "Karen, last name, come out with your hands up. You are under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and unlawful tampering with utilities." The cul-de-sac froze. The mighty Karen, queen of fines and notices, was being called out like a common criminal. I'll never forget the sight that followed. Karen appeared at her front door, still in her pink jogging suit, clutching her clipboard like a shield. Her voice wavered as she screamed. "This is a mistake. I'm the HOA president. I make the rules here." The officers didn't flinch. "Drop the clipboard. Step outside." She burst into tears, real hysterical sobs. She cried about misunderstandings, about being just a volunteer. She begged the neighbors to defend her. But no one moved. They just watched silently as the woman who had tormented them for years finally faced consequences. When the officers cuffed her and led her down the steps, her mascara streaking her once perfect hair disheveled, the neighborhood was dead quiet. You could hear nothing but the click of handcuffs and Karen's wailing. My wife leaned her head on my shoulder, exhaling the deepest sigh of relief I'd ever heard. "It's over," she whispered. And she was right. Karen's reign was finished. But what came after the peace, the reform, the freedom, was just beginning. The night Karen was taken away in handcuffs, the neighborhood didn't celebrate immediately. At first there was just silence, shock really. After years of her tyranny, it felt unreal to see her empire collapse in a single evening. Neighbors lingered on their lawns long after the SWAT vans left, whispering to each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. Inside our house, my wife and I sat together in the nursery. The curtains, those non-compliant cartoon clouds, fluttered gently in the night breeze. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we could finally breathe. My wife's hand rested on her belly, and she smiled faintly. "The baby will be here soon," she said softly. "And now we can finally give them a home that feels safe." I kissed her forehead. Safe and free. Karen's clipboard can't touch us anymore. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire. Some neighbors admitted they'd always suspected Karen was up to something shady, but never had the courage to challenge her. Others were simply relieved, as if a dark cloud had lifted from above their homes. The HOA, stripped of its tyrant, scrambled to reorganize. A new interim board was elected, made up of neighbors who actually cared about the community. One of their first acts was to abolish half the absurd rules Karen had created, everything from curtain colors to porch laundry bans. The fines disappeared. The threats vanished. And the best part, the HOA dues, once funneled into Karen's pocket, were finally used for what they were meant for. The community pool got repaired. The playground received new swings. Even the sidewalks, cracked and uneven for years, were fixed. Life returned to normal, better than normal, really. But Karen didn't vanish entirely. Her downfall made the local news. HOA president arrested in fraud and utility tampering scandal, the headlines read. Watching the segment on television, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. There she was, hiding her face from the cameras, the same woman who once declared the HOA always wins. This time she had lost. One evening, weeks later, my wife and I sat on the porch swing, sipping lemonade. The air was warm, the sky painted orange and pink. Neighbors strolled by, waving cheerfully instead of averting their eyes in fear. Mrs. Green stopped to chat. "It feels like we live in a whole new neighborhood," she said with a laugh. "It's peaceful again. I can even hang my wind chimes back up." I grinned. "Play them loud enough for Karen to hear from jail." We all laughed, and for the first time it felt genuine, not nervous. Then the day came when my wife went into labor. It was early morning, the kind of dawn where the world is quiet and expectant. I rushed her to the hospital, adrenaline coursing through me. Hours later, we welcomed our child into the world, a healthy, crying bundle of joy. Holding my baby in my arms, I realized just how close we'd come to letting stress and fear overshadow this moment. Karen had tried to break us down, but instead she made us stronger. When we brought the baby home, the nursery glowed with soft light. No one complained about the curtains. No one knocked on our door with a clipboard. The only sounds were the gentle coos of our newborn and the steady hum of the house, our house alive with peace. Karen was gone, but the lesson she left behind would stay with me forever. Looking back now, the whole ordeal feels like a twisted story out of a drama show, the kind you'd watch and say, "No way that really happened." But it did. And it taught me something powerful. Bullies only win when people stay silent. Karen built her reign on fear, on making everyone believe she was the ultimate authority. But authority without accountability is just tyranny. The moment people stood up, the moment evidence spoke louder than her threats, her empire crumbled like it was made of paper. For me, the real lesson was about protecting family. My pregnant wife needed rest, safety, and calm. Karen tried to take that from her. But when someone threatens the people you love, you don't bow down. You rise up, even if it means standing alone at first. And to anyone watching this, maybe you're dealing with your own Karen, maybe you're feeling powerless in the face of unfair rules or entitled behavior. Remember this: the truth is stronger than intimidation. Patience and persistence matter. Document, stand your ground, and don't let anyone convince you they're untouchable. In the end, Karen learned the hard way that nobody is above the law, and we learned that peace is worth fighting for. So tell me in the comments, have you ever faced a Karen in your life? What did you do about it? And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story will remind you just how sweet karma can be.